Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 5 p.m. and I will call the meeting to order for the regular council meeting on Monday, February 24th, 2020. Thank you all for being here, members in the gallery and press as well. First off, with respect to the agenda, I've got a couple items I'd like to reorder as far as bringing forward the minute adoptions prior to item number 6, and perhaps requests for decision depending on how much time is taken up by the presentation minutes and the adjustment there at the council's indulgence. I think that should be an issue, but does anyone else have any concerns with the agenda? Anything you'd like to add at this point in time? Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I move that we accept the agenda as amended.
Thank you very much. Councillor Conox, any concerns with the agenda? We are prepared to vote then. Everybody in favor? Unanimous, thank you. So the first item before us is a presentation by the Bike Skills Park Group, headed by Mrs. Corey Gish, I believe. If you care to join us up front here.
I have a crew.
And introduce the rest of your crew. Come on up here.
Actually.
There's 3 chairs there. If you need another one, just feel free to bring one up. Take a few moments to seat yourself, and I'll just take this opportunity to remind each one of you as you're speaking to please use the microphone, and as long as the red light is on, you're good to go. That just enables better sound quality for those watching online at home.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. So this group is a small representation of a group of people who have gotten together to... It's not on? Oh, turn it on. Is it okay? There it goes. Gotcha. So this group is a small representation of people who have gotten together with a proposal to take the existing Michener Park area behind the chamber office and turn it into a bike park. So I do believe that we did provide a PowerPoint presentation. And probably materials were in your package. So we've given just a quick schematic overview of what we are up to. So what the idea would be is to go through and use some of the existing terrain to the best advantage possible to create 3 particular trails around the outside. So just as you're looking through your material, you'll get some diagrams on that. So the proposal then would be that the park be multi-use. So by multi-use, we're talking about my gentleman friends here. So I have Jade Metzen and I have Carter Verhoeven with me, just as in case you have some questions about how these gentlemen would use the park and how they're currently using the parks in Black Falls as well. I also have Don Darrowan with me from Red Sports, and I have to say that this is definitely his brainchild. He's past the speaking to me perhaps, but definitely his brainchild. So the purpose would be to provide a spot where kids, adult children can go around and actually develop their bike skills. And what I've seen in some of my travels is this is a pretty common feature recreationally. I know my son has been to Whistler and used the park there. He's used the park at Zermatt, and in Penticton they spent hours at it. Carter and Jaden can speak to how much time they've spent at the Black Falls Park. So the idea of it will be that there would be a 3-part trail system. We have an outside loop that will be on the top of the park that will be intended to be for walking, biking with trailers, walking with strollers, or having children run across it. The 2 middle trails down into more of the pitch of the surrounding bowl would then be created so that they're more for intermediate and advanced mountain bike use. So Mr. Darwin here has been throwing this idea around and getting quite a bit of support. We have several groups who have indicated that they would love to see this and wanted to know if they could participate. One of them is the Cross Country Ski Club, who currently uses the golf course, but they are looking at this facility as a spot that might be a great extension for them. Another is the Bill Nielsen Trail Society has provided some support as well. And a couple of interested parties out of the boot camp contingent taking a look at being able to use these facilities just to run some of their outside use.
I also did hear back from, I also heard back from Dr. George and Rory Whitbread, and they would be interested in using that area for training of the high school kids for cross-country running as well, because of its topography and the idea that we would leave it as a natural space for not having cement or anything down there, easier for the runners.
So all in all, what we're looking to council for is for support of our proposal and for the assignment of this space for us to create this park. So we have provided quite a bit of information in the PowerPoint in quick point form, so I'm sure that you've had a chance to read it. But we do see this as a good draw into the city as well. The park will be located conveniently within the Trans-Canada Trail. It will be something that will draw in visitors to Central Alberta. So if they're out at Gull Lake with the kids, they can bring their bikes in. And what we do see is that this will be, it's not necessarily a competition with the Black Falls Park, but a good extension of it. The Black Falls Park is quite technical, and this will be a little bit more beginner to intermediate, so that we'll be able to see a lot of, a broad amount of family use. When you take a look at this picture that's on the screen right now, you can see we have the existing park space that's down there, and that we would end up setting up skills at varying levels so that we can have everyone from first riders to the adults enjoying the use of the space.
One thing we had talked about was there's groups like FCSS now and JS McCormick, who along with Lacombe Police Services run their bike safety in active parking lots. And something like this with the gravel trail down below and grass would get them out of a parking lot and into an area where they were actually safe to learn about safety. So that was another usage that we had thought would be good for this area.
So in your package, Don retained a man named Jay Hoots, who has actually designed parks across Canada and actually internationally. And so he's the person who's given us the background and even the photos that you have right here for the design. And he's also given us a proposed budget so that our group will know what we need to expect to fundraise, with different elements in our budget to allow us to do it in pieces if we need, but also to allow us to, when we're going out fundraising, ask for gifts in kind so that we can maybe approach a group of people. We can have the Kinsmen come out with their shovels, or a bunch of high school boys come out with their shovels to help reduce labor costs and things like that. So overall, the plan is coming together well, but we're definitely looking for some endorsements so that we can actually make this a real event. My ambitious goal is I'd like to see this completed by this summer so that it's in use. I'm getting some looks, but I think it can be done. So from that, I might just open it up for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for starters. Councillor Ross, got a question?
Thank you, Mayor Chris Morris. I can just direct us to CAO Gowdy. We've obviously already went through our budgeting for 2020, but under the Parks and Trails Rec and Culture Department, obviously every year is allocated for trails. Can this be, all due respect, but could this be diverted since this is trails within a smaller area, or is that possible?
You have set your capital budget for 2020, and you have a multi-year capital plan. You certainly could divert some of the funds from either one of those into capital improvements of the lower Michener area. It would be difficult for the 2020 without impacting other projects, because of course it's fully allocated. But there is money for trails in the 10-year capital plan, and they could be reallocated to this, if that was council's wish.
Councillor Jacobson.
Sure, a couple questions. And I apologize, I looked through a couple times, I couldn't find it anywhere, but do you know offhand roughly, how many kilometers of trail this is going to be?
We did know. We did know that. My recollection is that if you actually strung the 3 trails together, that it was about 5 kilometers of trail.
Okay. And just for clarification, so your ask from the city is for support and for allocation of the land. Does that entail then financial support for the construction and development? Is that what you're referring to?
No, we weren't going there.
Okay.
We would like the land, and I think that ultimately, once it's built, we'll be looking for some support in terms of the ongoing grass and maintenance that you're doing already. We weren't going to propose to take that over or have it be close to the public at all.
Yeah, and I just wanted that in maybe clarification to Councillor Ross's request there.
I have a lot of questions for you. I for one, want to commend you for doing a very good job in the presentation, both here and the package itself. I think that the community as a whole embraces these types of passive recreation ideas, and I look forward to seeing it move along, but that's a matter which we'll be speaking to later. So thank you once again for coming. I think that Councillor Hibbs may have a question for you as well.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yes, thank you for your presentation. This is definitely an exciting project. I think it's causing a lot of buzz already. It's kind of out there already. I think it's not a top secret thing, but it certainly is now official public, at our chamber table here. I guess my only question maybe would be directed maybe to the young people on your group here. Maybe if they do want to tell us a little bit about what this looks like, for users, explain a little bit more how maybe different age groups would be able to utilize this, and sort of like what the benefits would be, I guess, to our community for offering, something, a recreational opportunity that probably doesn't really exist in our community now, but could. And so maybe if you just want to expand on what the benefits of that would be, I think that would be beneficial.
Who would like the microphone first?
Am I good? Well, first of all, for the Pinoca dirt jumps, I never had a bike before that, and as soon as I had access to it, I bought a bike. I went out the first day, and who did I see? Tons of my friends who also did not enjoy or ride dirt jumps a lot before. That's because we didn't have it closed. With this, we could see people coming in from all over around Lacombe, people from other areas who are looking for this maybe on the other end of Black Falls, close to Pinoca. Rather than saving that long trip across Lacombe to Pinoca or Black Falls and Red for that fact, you could have it right in Lacombe, draw people in, and on top of that, it's a good mix with the skate park, baseball fields, and the convenience stores located down there.
It's also way different from the current dirt jumps in Black Falls. We have a different variant of outdoor trails, unlike Black Falls. They don't have the trails in the trees, and that's just a different way of riding. And, yeah.
One thing that does happen up there is we have our campground, and we also have ball tournaments happen there. One of the things that Jay brought up to us is he actually helped build the Hinton Bike Park, and the whole thing associated with that was he had to present to council why it's viable. And he found that overnight stays jumped in their town when that was available for people to use. So now when we have a softball tournament, maybe instead of the kids staying with grandma and grandpa, the kids end up coming to town and staying, and they've got a better place to play as well. And it starts to become a draw for that sort of thing. Or when people are out at Gull Lake, it draws them in here to play in Lacombe instead of just staying out at the lake, and then that drives revenue for all the businesses in town as well.
Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. And I had this question and I missed it. You were saying the difference here is to go through the trees, right? And that no mature trees would be removed in order to create these trails, right? But I gather some of the mature trees have been removed in the basin already. Is that a problem, or? Like, I'm seeing these ones on the left, kind of by the road piece or the trail.
I think with the schematic, it's a beginner, and so he'll have to actually take some real measurements and check the topography. But the idea is to work with what's there and existing, so that we know that there's going to be some wetter spots, so that we design the park and we design the different features in the skill park to that advantage. But with the trails themselves, we'll have to remove trees to create the trails. But the guy's got some experience. We've hired someone who knows what they're doing. So his idea is you have to also watch in these trails sight lines, so that if you get people jumping from one trail to the other, that you've got some safety features in mind. But the whole concept of it will be to keep it as natural as possible. That will be the attraction. That will be part of the success of the park.
Well, and thank you too for your presentation. I grew up around here, and that used to be one of the busiest places in Lacombe. And so if there's some initiative that makes this park busy again, I think those of us that are over 50 would go, good job.
Councillor Gullickson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'd just like to say I love this project. I think it's great. A great use of that space, and I agree with Councillor Hoekstra. It's very nice to see it getting reborn again. One of the issues I thought about, is there any environmental concerns with, how sensitive people are to these types of things when you're putting in 3 trails like this? Is there any concerns with the environment? I would have none myself. I think it's a great use of the space, but other people might be concerned with knocking down a few trees.
Actually, the spot, we picked it because it does have lots of water there already, and environmental is one of our thoughts. So you guys recapture the water from that and take it up to a holding pond up top. So that allows us to bring the water back down to do watering on that. So we're not taking out any groundwater. We'd be using water that's already held up top, and reduce our impact that way. Most of the features are going to be dirt, and a lot of those, well, the one trail exists already. We'd just be making it wider and better usage on it, and the ones through the trees should be fine.
Yeah, I think it's a great project, and I hope we don't run into any roadblocks like that. But the water down in the bottom, some springs there gets to be quite a bit there, and obviously you're working around that, and anything you build won't be affected by the additional flooding if there is any from spring runoff and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Councillor Gullickson. We do expect to be working with Town Works just to try to make sure that we're taking advantage of the existing pump out that they have, so that they will try to make sure that we're not, the worst thing for us to do is build a park that's underwater. That would be embarrassing. It's not our goal at all, but it's something that we're aware of and we'll have to work with.
So just one word of caution as you go in the community and your support and financial and otherwise. I was contacted by some individuals, which I found rather surprising, that were concerned about development of any kind in this area because of its value as strictly green space. I, however, after seeing this plan, I would suggest it's a very well thought out complement to the area as opposed to taking away from the green space, but just to know that sentiment does exist.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? Corey, did you have anything to say in conclusion?
No, other than just thank you very much for your time. We're excited about this project, and I hope you will be as well. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. So we do have a few moments available prior to our public hearing at 5:30, so I believe for the request for decision, if we go down to item 5.3, the Lower Michener Park Development, would be appropriate. Director Duke, would you care to take us through that item, please?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. This request for decision before council tonight is to provide additional information on the proposed redevelopment of Lower Michener Park, which was the subject of the presentation just now. You may be aware from the report that the Lacombe District Recreation Parks and Culture Board reviewed the group's proposal on February 11th, and they recommend council support the project in principle at this time. Tonight's report references the city's 2013 Recreation and Culture Master Plan, which shows a bike park as a future community infrastructure priority. The bike park facility proposed for Lacombe is a similar model to others in Alberta, which have proved to be successful and sustainable. In addition to the Hinton and Black Falls one, there's also one in Red Deer. That's quite popular. And there has been, there's evidence of bike park tourism becoming quite a thing in Alberta. Administration proposes with this RFD to work with the group to fully develop the project concept. We have to review the current condition of the park to determine if any remediation is required, for example, in drainage. And there is some difficulty with the current sump pump in spring, so that'll have to be looked at and addressed, and investigated at least. We need to know what, if any, contribution the group will request of the city. They have mentioned in-kind contributions, and we have heard that out, and also mentioned to the Community Builder Partnership Fund may be a good match for them as well. So we're working with them to consider that, although they maintain that they don't need potentially monetary contribution as much as the in-kind. They may request also support from the county, and CAO Gowdy has made the county aware of this proposal prior to this coming out on the agenda, so that they're well advised. And again, we also need to find out the cost to operate the facility when it's turned over to the city. Currently, in some parks, there's a model where a bike club does most, if not all, of the maintenance, usually with some monetary support from the city. I believe that's the case in Red Deer. So that is a model that continues the collaboration and makes sure that the investment is still in the facility from the local users and contributions from them ongoing. The ownership and so on is also important. So at this time, administration is seeking direction to return full information on the concept and the project to the Recreation and Culture Board, and if further supported there, on to council for additional decision making in the near future. Be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Duke. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I don't actually have any questions because I think I had them answered already by the presentation. I would say that I would agree that it is a good location. I think that the project looks, in principle, good for residents and for visitors. The added recreational opportunities are potentially endless, because those are the really obvious ones, but I wouldn't be surprised if more things become like, oh, did you know they could also be used for this or for that? So it's a great use of space. And it's also, I think, really exciting if you're talking to the group about how many people or how many entities within the community are actually pretty excited about this, and they want to get involved, and they're wanting to participate and volunteer their time or dollars or in kind or that sort of thing. So that's an exciting project. So I would like to go ahead then and move that council support in principle the redevelopment of the Lower Michener Park into a bike park, and direct administration to work with the organizing group to develop the project plan and seek further recommendations from the Lacombe District Recreation Parks and Culture Board.
Thank you. a lot of lights going on here, so then I will just add that I did like the idea that they seem to be realistic in their approach and that this could be phased in various ways. They could do the work they want. They had a fairly ambitious expectation for completion, in my opinion, but realizing that they did have some room for latitude there with their completion, I guess I certainly have no problem endorsing this proposal in principle anyway. Not often do we get community groups here seeking to enhance features for our community and not have a significant financial expectation at the same time. So. Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I too would support the comments made earlier. I think, all my time on the Lacombe, that place is, nothing's happened there, ever. I mean, there's been a few trailers from time to time, but I think this is a great redevelopment of that existing space and fully support.
Anyone else? Seeing no further input, I will call the question. All those in favor? Unopposed? Thank you. So in order to stay in line with the time frame here, we'll go up on to 5.2, the Alberta Community Partnership Grant application. I'll call on Director Piché to lead us through that item, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before Council tonight is a request for a motion in support of the Alberta Community Partnership Grant application. This grant allows communities who partner with other municipalities that have a common project with shared resources to apply for funding for up to $200,000. The fire service level review is an excellent fit for eligibility for the ACP grant. To complete the application, a letter of support with a motion of endorsement has to be submitted to the province before March 2nd of 2020. Attached to the agenda package is a letter of support from Lacombe County with their motion included. This evening, administration asks that Council supports the application for the Alberta Community Partnership Grant for the Lacombe Fire Services Review that is being completed with support from Lacombe County. At this time, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Director Piché. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. My only question was around on page 2 at the top, it says participating municipalities support. So you have Lacombe County, but do you have to get support from the smaller municipality? No, okay.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I understand this is a grant pertaining to the fire review, but this is also being in cooperation with the Lacombe County as well, in favor of support of Lacombe County. And this will be a little bit off topic, but when the review is being taking place, will who is doing the review the existing agreement between the regional and the city? Did that come out correctly?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Councillor Ross. Definitely part of the review is to look at all the governance and agreement models within our fire services, and that does include the county as well as the city.
Sorry, that was confusing.
Director Piché, well, I appreciate the honest way that this is presented. I'm curious as to why administration requires council approval to receive or to even apply for a grant.
This is new. This is something I wasn't aware of at first either until I actually contacted the grant facilitators, and they did say that we do require a letter of endorsement from all communities that are participating. So yes, we do need one.
Well, that's a very good reason then. Councillor Connick.
I would so move that Council supports the application for the Alberta Community Partnership Grant for the Lacombe Fire Services Review. That is completed with support from Lacombe County.
Thanks, Councillor Connick. Any additional comments or concerns? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. So we're we're just about at 5:30 here, I believe. So we're going to move into item number 4 to continue on our discussion with the land use bylaw amendments for bylaw 400.24 pertaining to the land use bylaw 400. And being it is now 5:30, I will declare that the statutory public hearing for bylaw 400.24 is now open, and that this hearing is held pursuant to sections 7, 8, 230, 606, and 692 of the Municipal Government Act 2000 as amended, and request the legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public meeting, that the statutory public hearing notice was advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the public hearing agenda package are read into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So the purpose of this public hearing, Mayor and Council, is to allow the general public to provide input to the proposed bylaw 400.24 to make a series of amendments to land use bylaw 400 per section 606 of the MGA. Requirements for advertising. Public hearing notice was advertised as shown in the Lacombe Express Thursday, February 13th and the Thursday, February 20th, and no written submissions were received.
Thank you. Remind everyone that all persons giving oral presentations are to clearly state their name, and presentations are to be brief and to the point. The order for the statutory public hearing presentations will be as follows. The development officer first, those in favor, then those opposed, followed by any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. I declare that the public hearing, my apologies, I was going to read that it opened again. We already opened it, so I would call on Director Thompson as the development officer to open discussions, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before council is bylaw 400.24. Administration is proposing second and third reading tonight, but we're also including 4 proposed amendments, which are based on the council's feedback at the 2 previous sessions where this bylaw was discussed. We will go over those changes following the public hearing.
So anyone choosing to speak in favor certainly is welcome to do so at this point in time. I do not see a huge rush towards the microphone here. I think everyone in here realizes that they're certainly welcome to do so. Seeing none, I will ask anyone opposed to these amendments to step forward and be heard. Welcome.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, please make sure that the red light on your microphone is on so that folks at home can hear your presentation as well. And whenever you get it turned on there, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Your Worship and councillors and administration. My name is Michael Wilson, and first I would like to thank you for providing the opportunity for feedback on the proposed changes to the land use bylaws. As a small business owner in Central Alberta and a Lacombe resident for the last 19 years, I have a strong appreciation for the role that both our community and the municipal government have in creating a strong, vibrant community. As members of Lacombe Council, I appreciate the role you have in governing our community, and I know that each one of you is focused on making the best decisions in order to ensure that Lacombe is a vibrant, thriving, and welcoming community for many years to come. We've been building in Lacombe since 2006, and I have enjoyed a healthy relationship with the city and the administration. Your administration team has been helpful and encouraging, and the bylaws, the rules, have been clear and easy to work within. In 2016, we applied to subdivide several lots in the central residential district. After removing the old houses, we installed services in hopes of building 6 single-family residences. Many of you will be familiar with the properties. We specifically subdivided the original properties into smaller lots with the intention of building one house at a time. Larger builders would have built a larger, more expensive multi-unit development. Single-family residences have slowed significantly in recent years, and it's been easier to move or to sell these cheaper, smaller multi-family units. However, as a small builder, we thought this would have stretched us too far. We don't have access to the large amounts of capital that it requires to build these larger developments. We thought, however, that we could build one house at a time and hopefully finish the project in about 5 years. As you are well aware, the economy in Alberta has changed significantly since that time. Home sales have been affected significantly in recent years, especially new home construction. I understand that one of your high priority commitments identified in the Council's 5 pillars of sustainability was to review the land use bylaw. Several weeks ago, I was contacted by Mr. Craig Teal with Parkland Community Planning Services in Red Deer, Alberta. Mr. Teal provided me with the proposed amendments to the land use bylaw 400. As a builder in Lacombe, usually the changes wouldn't have a significant impact on any of our projects. Usually you can look up the bylaws and see that your idea or if your project is feasible and then move forward from there. However, when the bylaws are changed midway through a project like mine, the results can be devastating. I know full well that I'm subject to your decision on this matter, but I would ask that you reconsider changing the current minimum 1.5 meter side yard setback to 2 meters as proposed in your changes to the land use bylaw 400, or at least allow me to complete the last 5 homes with the 1.5 meter setback. Because of our already narrow lot size, the 2 meter minimum side yard setback significantly impacts the width of building we're able to build on these lots. The proposed changes will limit the house widths to a maximum of 6.67 meters, or about 21 feet. Although homes of this width may be more common in densely populated areas, in central Alberta this is not a popular width for a freestanding single-family home. This specific bylaw revision would almost render my lots unsaleable. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Mr. Wilson, before you leave, I'll just ask, did Council have any questions for this individual we can discuss this evening, or was there none? Just to advise him, in fact, if there's any questions coming his way, you may want to leave or stay. You will have some, Councillor Jacobson?
Right now or later on, sorry.
I think while he's here, I think you might as well pose him now. Go ahead.
And I was just curious, Mr. Wilson, was that the only concern for the land use bylaw revisions that you found?
Yes. Just for the record, I did submit I thought we had till 4:30 today to provide written appeal, and I forwarded that to Mr. Craig Teal, and he said he would pass it on to the councillors.
Thank you. Was there additional background information involved in that particular item that you did not present to us in person here today?
No, just this.
Okay, that's fine. There are certain time frame requirements, and just to be clear, that written information was not provided because the time frame didn't allow for it. Our packages are put out last week, so that's the reason why. Just to be clear. Okay. Perhaps administration, someone familiar with the current file that was identified here. Is there possibilities for grandfathering? What's the process? What's in order to address the concerns outlined?
So if the bylaw, thank you, Mayor Creasy. So if the bylaw was adopted as proposed, including the 2-meter setback, then a variance request would be made. It would exceed the 50% variance. Administration would circulate the request to the neighbors, and then depending on the feedback we receive from the neighbors, then they'd use their discretion on whether to approve the variance or to take it forward to MPC for further consideration. So that'd be the process we would follow, assuming this bylaw goes through as proposed.
I appreciate that information. So just to be clear then, the changes that were made here would be applicable other than on specific parcels where construction has already been approved and is underway. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct. It applies to new development permit applications.
Very good. Councillor Jacobson?
Sorry, Mayor, maybe just a question of procedure here. Are you wanting, we're not about to debate this right now at the presentation day, the merits of the presenter's request, that'll be discussed later on, correct?
That's correct. Once again, though, if there was any specific concern while the speaker's here, I would assume they'd be brought forward now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So are there any additional who wish to speak opposed to these proposed amendments? I see no one's coming forward, so I will move on to any person deemed to be affected or wishes to be heard on this subject. Certainly free to do so now. We've had sufficient time for anybody to respond, and it is now 5:40. I will declare that the public hearing for bylaw 400.27 closed at 5:40 p.m. Thank you. Manager Reyes, I think we'll move into our item 5.1, request for proposal for assessment services at this time. Would you care to take us through this item, please?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before Council tonight, there is a request for decision to award assessment services for the City of Lacombe for the years 2020 to 2025. The City of Lacombe's current assessment services contract has been in place since August 2013 and is at the end of its term. Consequently, a request for proposal was issued by the city in January 2020, and we received 5 responses, with one being disqualified since it arrived after the deadline. The city has been served well by our current assessor, who has maintained the contract over the last 6 years, and administration appreciates the service rendered by our current assessor. In compliance with the city's purchasing policy, the RFP process has been transparent and competitive to ensure fairness and value. In order to achieve this, a criteria was used and applied to all submissions. This resulted in scores that varied from 79 points to 90 points. Based on the evaluation results, administration recommends that the contract be awarded to Wild Rose Assessment Services, Inc. Wild Rose Assessment Services fees will start at $15.50 per parcel in the first year, and they will increase every year to $17.50 in the last year, in the 5th year. In 2020, administration is anticipating a total savings of $17,000 when compared to the budgeted amount. The recommended motion tonight is that Council award the assessment services contract to Wild Rose Assessment Services, Inc., and that Wild Rose Assessment Services, Inc. be appointed as the assessor for the City of Lacombe for the years 2020 to 2025. Now I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Senior Manager Reyes. We appreciate that. Councilor your Councillor Clonic, you were first, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Is our current assessor Wild Rose Assessment Services?
Our current assessor is Powers and
Okay,
Associates.
that's what I thought. Secondly, do all of these assessment, maybe you can't answer this, I don't know, but do all of these assessors operate the same way? Do they do these kind of blanket assessments where they don't do individual houses, but they take a neighborhood and they look at all-encompassing statistics and everything else? Like, do they all operate the same way essentially? Can you even answer that? I don't know.
Based on the proposals that we received, they use very similar methodologies when it comes to assessment. They all use physical inspections, which we, in the proposal, stated that we would like 1 quarter to be done every year. So over a 4-year period, all properties in Lacombe would be inspected. And all assessors have qualifications that allow them to perform the work that we are requesting.
Okay, no, I was more curious to the methodology and you answered that. I've heard from a few commercial business owners in the last couple of weeks. For example, there's one fellow whose property was assessed at $560,000, now it's 1.1 million. So he's got some issues. And I think I've heard a lot from a lot of commercial business owners in the last few years, and I'm just hoping that maybe there's a different methodology because it seems to be, well, maybe, I don't know, it doesn't seem to be working for a number of folks, the current methodology, but that's...
Chief Gotti?
So I think that what you're referring to is probably the income approach and the mass appraisal system that we have here in the city of Lacombe. I don't think you will get away from annual complaints about assessment. I am also aware of the specific incident you're talking about, and we're working with our current assessor to look at that. There may have been an error in one of the calculations. But that would be the same methodology that is provincially audited every year, applied to any assessor that we get on board.
Thank you. That I was going to add, it's pretty much the same thing, that I don't think we're ever going to get away from individuals who have issues with assessment values or methodology or whatever the end result is, because it does have a significant impact on their assessment base. That is not, I don't think, an issue with the current provider as much as it is whoever we choose to do it is implementing provincially approved methods, whichever is utilized. So, Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So my question when I first looked at this information was, did you feel that there was enough difference with the Wild Rose Assessment Services that would warrant you to switch away from your current assessor? Because it kind of takes a while to develop that relationship with the assessor, and so I realize there is a significant cost savings here. Was that the desire to emphasize cost savings? I know that it fit in within your rubric, but isn't there some value in sticking with the same business for a while? That would be my first question, but I do have another question.
When we were reviewing the proposals, we definitely considered the relationship that we have, and we consider all the factors that were being evaluated, and we definitely were careful when we made a decision, and we to recommend Wild Rose. And the main reason is we apply the criteria that have been set, and based on the criteria, we feel that that's the best value for the services that we are getting at the City of Lacombe.
Meg?
You back up? Certainly, go ahead.
And taking into account that there will be some years of transition too, right? When you get a new assessor, right, there'll be some years of transition, but so I did speak to the assessor today inadvertently because I was being a citizen and looking at my assessments. So that he compared some notes, but the question was, does this quote from Wild Rose include the cost of using the software that they all have to use?
The quote includes all the costs associated with assessment services.
I thought I saw a light on this item. Nope. Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So we obviously have a matrix scoring system based upon the RFPs, and yet I'm kind of reading between the lines. It would have also been kind of nice to know the information of how did our own existing, was there other, relationship issues of not dealing in a amicable fashion that creates the need for the RFP? Like it's like we're kind of, I feel like it could be, we're evaluating the existing one, there's only 2 major points difference. How did this individual service provider do already? I guess that's kind of information for the only 2 major points difference.
So prior to giving CEO Gowdy the opportunity to speak, I would suggest that in the opening, Senior Manager Reyes made it perfectly clear that there was no ongoing issues, that this was simply due procedure with an item of this amount of dollars involved, that we do an awful lot in the municipal world, whether it's securing services for assessment in this case, or in procurement of machinery or anything else. This is the process that's laid out, and it's, I would suggest it ought to be fair for all of the applicants. In this particular case, I would suggest it's rather close as far as the score goes overall. I don't think there was anything unusual about this process overall, and the criteria seems to be reasonable, in my opinion, but as with supply of any service or products, there can only be one winner. Chief Gowdy.
From an administration standpoint, it is always preferred to stay with the existing service provider because of exactly what you've highlighted, that we have a good relationship, and I feel I should point out Mr. Powers is in the audience here. We have a great relationship, and they have provided really good service. There hasn't been any complaints over that time. The issue we had is that once we've gone down this road of a public procurement process, which we are mandated to do through council policy, we need to be able to stand behind the recommendation as to why we would, in this case, spend tens of thousands of dollars extra over the term of that contract. And that was one factor, and to be honest, given the points with the 2-point difference, if that were the only factor of differentiation between the two firms, we probably would stay with our current service provider. But there is an additional factor of the risk to the city from a shop that has one certified assessor versus the recommended service provider that has many assessors. And so the risk of not being able to provide those assessment services, should something unfortunately happen to that one certified assessor, is much higher for the city of Macomb with the current service provider.
Councilor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I guess my question is, where does that fall in this rubric, that whether there's one person in the shop or 10? Is that assessment experience? Like how did that get weighed more heavily than the current positive relationship we have? I guess that would be, I'm just speaking to what I heard today, but I guess it really needs to be noted that I was dealt with extremely professionally today without this person knowing that I was a city councillor, and he also knew that his contract was ending, which I would have to question a little bit that process, because that decision hadn't been made, but yet he knew his contract was ending.
Well, I can't speak to that last item. I guess to a certain extent, we have to value the assessment that was put before us here, and I think that not an easy decision or recommendation for administration to make. But I do appreciate the work that went into it, and in this particular case, respect the recommendation, or value the recommendation that they made. So, Chief Gowdy?
So just with respect to your last question of how the current contract owner was aware, or holder was aware, when we posted the council agenda, which is a public document, Senior Manager Ray has contacted Mr. Powers to let him know, so that he was well aware of the decision and didn't find out after the fact of the recommendation, I'm sorry, the recommendation.
Anyone else? You're prepared to make a motion, Councillor Connick?
I also move that council award the assessment services contract to Wild Rose Assessment Services Incorporated, and that Wild Rose Assessment Services Incorporated be appointed as the assessor for the city of Lacombe for 2020 to 2025.
Thank you. Anybody have any additional comments or concerns before we proceed? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Those opposed? Bushra and Ross, so noted. In opposition. Thank you, everyone. Not to mix everyone up, but I think we will skip enforcement, rather than getting on to a totally new subject at the moment, and go to 5.5, the land use bylaw 400.24 updates, and propose second, perhaps third reading. Director Thompson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before I highlight the changes that the administration is proposing, I do want to say that Planner Teal did check his alternate email address, and Mr. Wilson's submission was received this afternoon. And so in reading it, it is verbatim what he had presented to council. And so there isn't any new information in terms of in this submission before council. So we'll look at that process and make sure that is buttoned up for the next land use bylaw. So
thank you, Director Thompson, for clarifying that. That was specifically why I asked the individual if there was any additional information to that, and he himself stated that there was not. However, in future, it would be nice if they were, preferable if they were included. In my opinion, that's not that severe at this point in time over that item, because the individual was in fact here in person to make the presentation. Okay. Continue, thanks.
So, yeah, before council tonight is a recommendation for 3 motions. The first one is and includes a number of changes that we propose to make based on council's feedback, and that is recommended motion number 1. We are asking for council to make that motion prior to considering second and third reading. Just from a procedural point of view. So the motion number 1, it proposes to amend the bylaw that is before council at first reading. And so it's not proposing to amend the land use bylaw directly, it's proposing to make changes to the first reading version of the changes. And so I apologize, it's especially motion 1B is kind of difficult to follow. But I'll do my best to try to explain it. So motion 1A, this is to do with the essentially the allowance of a temporary storage building in the CCAN in a residential area. We had proposed a 30-day period, and based on the feedback, we are now recommending council change it to a 60-day period. So that change is included in item 1A. I'll go over 1B last. 1B or 1C is regarding the predetermination of which lots can be allocated as secondary suites when a development is proposing an outline plan. We are recommending a change now that only up to 50% of the possible lots that could be secondary suite in a certain development be allocated at the outline plan stage. That will allow for any new proposals for a secondary suite to come forward, just to come forward, and then for administration and for the development authority to consider those. Otherwise, if it was 100%, the full allocation would have been allotted, and we wouldn't be able to consider any further secondary suites. And that was a point of discussion at the last workshop. Item 1D is a proposed change to the removing the coverage for our 5 lots. That was not supported when we presented that, so that we're just proposing to remove that clause altogether. Regarding item 1B, this has to do with the landscaping strip on either side of the driveways. And so we've handed out a sketch just to try to depict what we mean by the clause, what the end intent is. If you look at the kind of consider this in quadrants, there's the top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. Everything on the left-hand side would be allowable under the proposed changes. Everything on the right-hand side is what our current existing LUB speaks to. So what we had proposed under the prior to the current change would have resulted in the top left scenario where you have a multifamily development and there's a driveway, a single driveway for each lot, separated by a landscaping strip. What we're proposing is that the multifamily units also be treated like single-family lots and allow for these 2 driveways to be butted together. That is currently permitted in our land use bylaw, where you have 2 driveways that can be butted together, as long as there's landscaping on either side of those 2 driveways. And so when we looked at the clause, and based on some of the council's feedback, we found that the item 1R, it proposed to add a clause when in fact we could amend an existing clause in the land use bylaw to make this happen. And so it does provide some clarity on what type of driveways are permitted in a multi-family residential development. It specifically excludes apartment buildings from this condition. Apartment buildings would fall under a different category altogether with their own parking lot. So if there's any questions on that, perhaps we'll leave it at that, and then we can answer any questions before we move on to second and third.
Councillor Jacobson?
Sorry, so specific questions on that explanation of the amendment, or questions on the whole thing?
I think we should, in order to try and keep this in a little more orderly fashion, if the items that were spoken on so far would be preferable.
So I have a question for you with this, just so I'm very clear here. With this proposed amendment to parking for multifamily, so as I understand it, what is shown on the bottom here would be allowed just in this quadrant right here, Director Thompson?
Yes, this scenario would be permitted, or this would be allowed.
Okay. So what about in a townhome development very similar to Henner's Village in Henner's, where you have high density multifamily townhomes that are not apartments, but they're clearly a condo. They're like an R5 development. Would that be would a development that be required to have this much, or would that be required to have some kind of landscaping between every second set of parking stalls?
The requirement for driveways is they must have a 1 meter landscaping separation between them, but you are allowed to butt 2 of them together as long as there's 1 meter on either side. Now we are excluding apartments, which would have a common hallway like your traditional apartment. So in your case, where you have a multi-family dwellings with independent accesses to a single building, if they had street parking associated with them, like front street parking, then they would be subject to the same provisions here, where you'd have to have essentially driveways butting.
But not internal parking.
But if there's internal parking, that's a separate part of the bylaw.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I actually have more of a procedural question. I'm finding the way that this is being handled awkward because we've already done first reading. And so why is it that we wouldn't just bring second reading with these amendments? Because I'm struggling finding that this is a proper application of a motion. Like it doesn't seem to fit how things are typically done. So I guess if we could have some sort of explanation as to why this wouldn't just be proposed as second reading with the following amendments, because that's not what this is being presented as. So if you could explain to me why it's being done this way.
Well, certainly if council's prepared to make second reading with the proposed amendments, that would be equally as satisfactory. It was to just discern the changes separately in case there were some alternate changes to kind of keep them away from second reading. Also in case council wasn't prepared to make second reading tonight and request administration to come back, and then we could do that and table second reading for a further meeting.
Okay, that is to me, satisfactory answer. I would suggest to council that second reading with the following amendments, or maybe not all the amendments, whatever the case may be, would be the appropriate way to go, unless somebody else has a really good reason why not. But that is what I would suggest we do. Not that saying that I'm prepared to make that motion at this time, but yeah, just, you know, when we're dealing with things like this with bylaws, I think it's we have to make sure we do it correctly. So that would be my interpretation.
Thank you. Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So, Director Thompson, so in respect to this diagram, so the bottom is what it is today, and you're saying the top is the proposed?
Everything on the right-hand side is how the existing bylaw reads. It is, I guess, absent of specific provisions on multifamily lots. Everything on the left is what is proposed, and then both the top and the bottom would be acceptable under the current bylaw, or under the proposed amendments.
Oh, okay, so
everything we see here could be done.
Everything we see here could be done under the case.
Oh, okay, because I'm thinking, okay, as long as they have the option to do either or, because I don't want to get, because I'm just thinking the top left, I mean, you've got 8 feet of green space between the driveways. That's, you can't park a pickup truck in those spots, whereas you can on the bottom. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just, when I look more and more at this, I wonder why we would even, anyways, that's, as long as you can allow both and developer has a choice, so that's fine.
Director Thompson, I'm just wondering on the, what's the proper terminology for a job shack or site office space, or is it a temporary building, or what is it? In there, the timing, we discussed it, and initially I think it was 30 days, and then we changed part of it to 60 days, and then an appeal for only half of that, for 30. And I seem to recall that we had discussed a more appropriate time for a construction period, if that's what, in fact, what this is to allow for, was closer to 5 months. When I had proposed the question to Councillor Jacobson, he suggested that would be a more likely scenario as opposed to the, I think currently it's been boosted to perhaps 60 days plus an ask for 30 more, so a total of 90.
Yeah, certainly we were trying to strike a balance between having a temporary building or a CCAN on a piece of property for an appropriate length of time, and so the 30 days is what originally proposed. We're extending that, or proposing to extend it to 60 days, but certainly if the council wished to provide a longer period of time, that would be, it's just a matter of picking a day. That would be palatable.
Okay. And as far as the proper terminology for the job shack or office space, I think we all know what a CCAN is, but at what time does a trailer, is it an accessory building, is it temporary, what's the proper terminology?
And so we would use the term temporary building on site.
Okay. So I guess the reason I ask is that it does present some issues for timing, because if you look on page 135, that it clearly identifies temporary buildings and already addresses in 10.11.2 the length of time which temporary buildings may remain erected to a maximum of 8 months. So there's certainly some conflict there that we'll certainly want to try and get that addressed before we move on. Chief Cowdy?
So I believe the change to 30, from 30 to 60 days was the time period during which developers have the ability to apply for a job shack or CCAN on their site for the duration of the permit. Is that correct, Director Thompson?
The intent was to provide a total length of time in which the building would be on site, and that was the 30 days or the 60 days, instead of the full length of the development permit.
So I guess that's where the problem lied for me, because it's not real clear here which one of these would govern when temporary buildings are already, the time frame is outlined clearly in 10.11.1 and .2. At what point does one become a... So I guess quite frankly, I find it very unlikely that the proposed 90-day time period for the legitimate use of a job shack is sufficient for, it can be sufficient for very few construction projects in 3 months. So we've got some work to do there and try and make it line up with the provisions in 10.11 as well. Councillor Jacobson?
My comment is, if the intent of this is to strictly regulate the time that specifically job shacks as temporary buildings, I mean, why wouldn't we just, instead of trying to guess the number of months or days that it's going to fit every single project, why don't you just simply say that the duration of the building permit is valid, the job shack can be on site?
That's certainly a possibility, but that would be close to what is temporary in place now.
You could eliminate 10.11.2 and just simply make that the case.
Certainly you could. And in C, it's also the building is removed within 30 days, so theoretically that 8 months is now 9 months. So, but certainly a possibility that it could be for the duration of the development permit, but I think we wanted, because it has been problematic in the past, I think we wanted to have a little more direct control over it, but your point is well taken. Director Thompson?
To speak to this provision here, that section speaks to temporary buildings on commercial and industrial districts. And so right now there isn't an allowance for temporary buildings at all in residential districts. And so this provision would allow for temporary buildings to be placed in a residential district for up to, right now, 60 days. So that there is already an allowance for temporary buildings under this clause for 8 months in commercial and industrial zoned areas. Just nothing like that is in place for residential areas.
Okay, that's nice to have that clarification. I'm just not sure we'd be doing ourselves any favor by having 2 different time frames. If it's allowed for a certain length of time, I would like for us to consider they'd be matched up, whatever the appropriate time limit is. So regardless, then, if whatever we term it, whether it's a CCAN that's been converted into a job shack or a trailer, anything like that, the result is the same. As it currently exists, there is no provision for the use of those on residential areas, and that's what this would do. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Councillor Hoekstrom?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I guess I also have a procedural comment. We are having quite an extensive discussion without a motion on the floor. Shouldn't we first be having a motion on the floor that we are discussing? Just because, yes, that's...
according to our bylaws, that is the way that we do initiate the discussion, is by someone introducing a motion, so thank you for that, and that would certainly be the preferred course of action. Councillor Conacher.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Just further to the Job Shack business, I guess I'm struggling with this a little bit. We've survived this long without this provision for residential construction. If I'm a homeowner and an infill goes in beside my property, where is this Job Shack going to go? Like, is it, like, I'm more concerned with placement than duration. Like, if it's going to sit in the front yard for 8 months, no, I don't like that idea too much. I mean, I guess I get why, but I'm more concerned with placement now. I mean, now I'm not nitpicking, but I'm just, do you want a trailer parked on somebody's front lawn for 6 months? Or, I mean, if it's in the backyard, okay, but we've never had this provision before. I mean, I guess I understand where it's coming from, but I'm wondering if it's even altogether necessary.
Thank you for that. Perhaps the administration could just speak to whether or not we currently have expectations of where a Job Shack would be placed as is currently provided for with respect to commercial and industrial properties.
Just what would be subject to building code? Is there building code restrictions on where the Job Shack can be placed, its contents, its proximity to other buildings? But certainly a CCAN, for instance, on someone's driveway is not prohibited under what's being proposed. So it's possible that under the current bylaw proposal, you have a CCAN on someone's driveway for whatever length of time is allowed.
So, in your opinion, would it be reasonable or not to have the city have an expectation of where it will be located, especially in a residential location? Because I think that's a valid concern. Somewhere we've got to be able to strike a balance, being able to accommodate the builders and the requirement, the obvious reasons they would want to have some sort of a Job Shack, and the expectations of the neighbors that may not necessarily want to look at it for an extended period of time.
It really comes down to how the builder wants to use that Job Shack in the best way. Having it on the driveway might be the quickest and most efficient way for the builder. Having it in the backyard might be out of sight, but more of an inconvenience for the builder or whatever work is happening on site. Many folks don't have that option in the backyard. They have a garage perhaps in the backyard, and a temporary building is not very conducive to a building in the backyard. So if we were to require or prohibit this temporary building from being in the front yard or something like that, then it just limits who can access this provision for what they need. That's my
Fair enough. So I guess I would just go back to Councillor Connick because he brought the item up in the first place. Is it the specific location or the appearance of this structure, the size of it? What are you foreseeing as being the difficulty here?
Well, I could see a whole can of worms being open here, especially on an infill. Maybe not in a new residential subdivision, but especially on an infill where someone buys an empty lot, pops a CCAN on the front yard and sits there for 9 months. I just see no end of complaints and concerns, and even a Job Shack. I don't know. The more I read it, the more I think we shouldn't even have it at all. I mean, we've survived this long without it. Why are we doing? I don't know. I just see a whole, appearance, location, and it makes sense what Director Thompson is saying. Maybe he's more easily accessible in the front than the back, so that makes sense. But I can just see neighbors complaining the way that all this construction activity right in their front yard, right next to them, is going to be problematic.
So I think it's been a while since we looked at the public input document. Was that not one of the items that was brought forward from, I expect, a contractor that wanted some sort of provision to make the possibility of having a Job Shack on site, Director Thompson? Or how did this?
I believe this is actually one of the ones that administration proposed because we had seen some CCAMs pop up throughout the community, and that was we follow up with the owners. That was their intended use. They're doing some renovations or wanting to move some furniture around or whatever the case is. And when we looked at their intent, it seemed like it made sense, like we would allow for this, but right now our bylaw wouldn't, and so we would have to enforce on them or require them to remove that CCAN if it persisted there. And so that was one of those ones that administration had put forward for council's consideration.
Councillor Jacobson.
I guess I've got a bit of a dichotomy in my mind here because I guess I can certainly agree with a 30-day period if a CCAN's on site simply for doing some movings or non-permit requiring construction or renovations. That would make a tremendous amount of sense to me. And much as I would feel sorry for neighbors who are upset with the unsightliness of it, that's usually an indication, that whoever's doing that is trying to be organized and keep things neat and tidy and not having it spread all over the place. So, that's kind of usually the lesser of two evils. But in my mind, if it's permitted construction work, there's no way 30 days is going to work, and that it should be genuinely tied to the length. Again, I hate to come back to it, should be tied to the length of the construction permit. It'd be very simple to monitor them that way. So I don't know if we need to just revisit the wording of this, like I said, and kind of split this off between, permitted construction work and then whatever else you want to call it, you renovate your store, whatever, 30 days for that, and regardless, and anything else that is like that. And to me, that would make a lot more sense, perhaps, and speak to some of the concerns that are cropping up here.
Councillor Hibbs?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. That's what I was kind of thinking too, is if we could have two different classes, I guess, if you want to consider that. And going back to Councillor Hoekster's point, I think it would be probably a good idea to have an actual motion on the floor. So I will take the leap and do that. So I would move that council give second reading to bylaw 400.24 with the following amendments, and I would include the amendments that are listed above, however with changes, not A as written there, but I would like to have it so that it somewhat encapsulates what Councillor Jacobson said there, because I think there's some wisdom in that. Because those are actually two very different uses of a temporary building. It makes sense that they would be significantly different time periods. So I guess I would put that out as a motion to debate.
Chief Deputy?
So just so I understand the motion, it is a second reading of the bylaw as proposed with all amendments other than A, which is essentially changed that the temporary building would be allowed for the duration of the permit on site. No other changes. What did I say? Building permit, I'm sorry. Building permit.
Yes, except that I think that it should also include sort of a separate, like that's for the purpose of construction, but I was thinking that it would make sense to reflect somehow that if somebody's using a temporary building for a non-construction type of use, if that should be reflected in there.
Certainly. Chief Gotti, go ahead.
So of course we can do that. However, I actually can't really think of a compelling case as to when someone would require a CCAN or something for work that wasn't significant enough that they were pulling a permit. Usually work that wouldn't require a permit, I can't actually see why you would need to bring a whole job shack on. Is that my mistake? Can you think of examples?
What number do you have in that?
So certainly one instance would be in the case of you needed a CCAN for a restoration project of fire or flood, that kind of thing. That's not really a job shack, but it's a CCAN. But they would still have a demolition permit in that respect anyway. Director Thompson?
Thanks, Councillor Ross, for letting me in. So examples, I would say replacing flooring, sometimes that doesn't require a permit, and furniture could be moved outside of the home into a temporary building, would be one example. Installing flooring in a basement, work in a garage, someone wants to do some concrete polishing or something like that, so those tools have to come out. So there are some, yes, there are some examples I think that you could draw on.
Who's up next, Councillor Ross was, or kind of?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. So to deal with the citizen that came forth with a concern to our first public hearing, on the sheet that was provided, and for the record, to address the citizen's concern and feedback, I guess my question was, his is obviously 1.5 to 2 meters. Obviously, administration and planning developments review the pros and cons of both. So to respond to this individual for the record, what was the justification of either having 1.5 or 2 meters? And just to respond, I think would be appropriate to the citizen.
So the proposal was because infill development, there was a concern when infill development happens that it is has the appearance of densifying a neighborhood. That is, we have large lots of smaller homes that has a certain look and feel in the older part of Lacombe, and the setback that the current buildings have is quite significant, and the redevelopment of those buildings is kind of eroding on that current setback. And so the 2 meter wide proposed setback was to kind of again try to strike a balance for the allowance of greater development to occur on larger lots, while still providing I'd say a greater, more of a setback than what is seen or what can be achieved in other areas of Lacombe. And so that is the reason why it has been proposed to try to strike that balance in that older area of Lacombe.
So to further his, obviously is 21 feet versus 24 on a meter wide of the potential of the home. So obviously you drive by Calgary, you see very narrow. What are the dimensions of them and other communities? Are we in line with changes of high density infills to other communities? Because I'm just asking for information to respond to that, to be consistent.
Yeah, I think Mr. Wilson was correct. Certainly, it could be more dense. Just what is palatable in Lacombe, what's within Lacombe's market to be able to sell, and certainly other places in Calgary, larger centers, they can go narrower in terms of narrower lots, narrower homes.
Thank you.
So just to reiterate then, to address that individual that spoke, he still has open at his discretion to apply for a variance to the Municipal Planning Commission. And it's my expectation that project that was initiated prior to changes would certainly, that would be given some weight to the decision. So we can offer that as well, just to make sure that he's fully aware of that. Councillor Jacobson?
Yeah, I want to speak very strongly to this issue. And I was not aware of this particular development when we had originally discussed this. I was opposed to this 2 meter side yard setback, and I won't bring that up. Do we happen to know what the zoning of his redeveloped are? Is it R1 or the R1 ends? Do you happen to know? Because I know they're very narrow.
I believe they are R1 ends.
So would those be then, would that still fall under the 2 meter side yard setback? Or is it just R1 lots?
It's not specifically tied to the R1 zoning, it's tied to the DARP area.
Okay. So I'm going to strongly suggest we consider a grandfather clause for this developer. Okay. This developer is very representative of the development community in Lacombe, which is homegrown, small individuals, not much capital to outlay, trying to do something to make it work in this economy. I mean, I wasn't around in 2016, but I can imagine getting 6 lots subdivided in that neighborhood wasn't a very easy thing to do in the first place, okay? So the neighborhood is already aware and has come to grips with the fact that this is the kind of housing that's going to be going in there, okay? So, and he is not incorrect in stating that by imposing this on him, and yes, he certainly is able to go to MPC, but again, that is an extremely rigorous process in this neighborhood. He's made his investment decision under the understanding 5 years ago that these were the rules that he was going to be allowed to develop under. And for us to then move the goalposts on him after the fact in this horrific time of doing this, this is the worst thing you can do to somebody doing this, okay? So I would strongly encourage all of you to consider a grandfather clause for this particular case. I think it sends a very clear message that we understand that while this is the will of council moving forward, that we are acknowledging that an infill redevelopment application and rezoning was made and approved, and we respect the fact that that there's a tremendous amount of capital for this developer deployed, and we want to respect his ability to hopefully realize, if not profit, certainly getting it out in as efficient a manner as possible.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Just for further clarification, this development in question started with a lot or two and is now been divided into 6 R1N lots, is that correct?
Sorry. Mr. Wilson's going to be Mulvey Hill. They subdivided all the lots and built a lane and installed services to service these 6 lots, 6 lots all at once. And he just built one home on one of the lots so far. And I think his intent was to stage the building of these homes over time as the market would allow. So all the lots are subdivided and serviced by Mulvey Hill.
So one has been completed out of?
I think it's 5 or 6.
5 or 6, okay, very good. Chief Gowdy, has clarification on that?
So if council desired to do a grandfathering action, I would recommend that we would bring back a 3rd reading of this bylaw at a future meeting with a site-specific exemption for those specific properties identified by Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Councillor Connick.
And I would strongly agree with that as well. As Councillor Jacobson alluded to, he spent a lot of money, as you just said, he split this up into 5 lots, he's put the services in for 5 lots. Yes, it's nice to say it could go to NPC if NPC approves it, but then somebody appeals it and goes to SDAB, SDAB could potentially overturn it, and then he's in a huge pickle. So absolutely, we need to make that change and allow for the grandfathering of this, because that, that's very onerous for that particular building.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. This is the reason I wanted a motion on the table, because I was less concerned about these amendments as to the message that came from Mr. Wilson. It would concern me greatly if we didn't support the grandfathering clause. I like Councillor Jacobson's idea and endorse it.
Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you for recognizing me. I also agree with that 100%, but taking a look at the DARP area, I mean, there's a lot of lots within that area that aren't that large. They're not all large lots in that zone. Should we be looking at a different way of looking at it, that we don't restrict all the developments on even these smaller lots that are out there? I know it's a hard thing to do, but to say lot size instead of being specific, is that a possibility? So that we include some of these other areas where if somebody came in and wanted to do a development on a smaller lot that's within that area, they wouldn't be restricted by that 2 meter.
That certainly does change the intent quite a bit, but I think there's a far difference between having gone through the process and done everything correctly and then have the bylaw changed, as opposed to having it working from the bylaw change and then going about your lot redesignation is far more palatable, so certainly something to be considered though. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So going back to the motion that I proposed, I would like the two different classes to be in there with the with that one, like the A, the Amendment A. So it would be for the duration of the development permit, building permit for construction projects for the placement of the temporary building, but for the purposes of storage, 30-day I think would be appropriate. So I would like those two classifications. And that is the only clarification. So my motion stands as is. I think that I'm interested in what we're talking about as far as the re-looking at the setbacks. I think that could be addressed at third reading. So I think we would be okay to go ahead with, if council supports, second reading with the amendments we already discussed, and then holding off on third reading to another meeting to have this discussion on the side yard setbacks. Does that am I clear? Sorry, I'm kind of rambling a bit.
No, I think you are clear. I'm just curious if you would like those items to be treated individually or wholesale.
I think it would be wholesale. If anybody does not like them, they can go ahead and make a motion to amend that motion, but that is the way that I have read it, is all in.
Thank you. Councillor Hoekstra?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I'm curious though, do we pass second reading if we want a grandfathering clause in there? Because if we pass second reading, we say we want it as is. So at what point do we attach that grandfathering clause? Well, but we have to direct it to be changed. It can't just be addressed at third reading.
Chief Cowdy?
So we will present a third reading that includes clearly laid out options. So I would say, from what I'm hearing, there is either a site-specific amendment that allows Mulvey Hill to continue on. There is an option that says the overlay for everything other than R1N, it's 2 meters, R1N remains at 1.5 meters, or there is an option of remaining 2 meters for everything across the board, and Mr. Wilson can live with it, I guess. Those would be the three options that I would see being presented as a third, with the third reading.
Councillor Clark?
That sounds terrific in terms of that particular item. Just to process again, so I do have an issue with A. Did we pass the motion or we vote on the amendment first? Just remind me.
I'll answer my attention.
Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So what my point was earlier is that I feel that it would be improper to pass amendments and then do second reading. The proper procedure would be to bring second reading, incorporating the amendments that we wish, or don't, whatever we decide on. This is what I proposed. And so that you're passing second reading with amendments, so that now, following second reading, the bylaw looks like what it did before, except now incorporating these changes, except that I added this small change. Does that make sense? But you're not voting on each individual amendment separately. The only way that you would do that, for example, is if I were to make this motion, which I have already, and you disagreed with something on that, then you would then make a motion to amend my motion, and then we would actually vote on just that amendment. Say you wanted to make an amendment that all houses needed to be red, any new house needs to be red. That's your new amendment. We would vote on whether that would be acceptable to be added to the original motion. It passes, fails, whatever, we go back. I know I'm really geeky about this stuff, but I love it. So that would be the appropriate way to do it. So right now the motion would be for second reading, incorporating those amendments that I listed, and either we vote on that or you're bringing another motion on top of that, which then supersedes.
So just for council's benefit,
Where we're at right now is, Councillor Hedges' motion was for second reading of the bylaw with all amendments listed other than 1A, which changes that the temporary building be allowed for the duration of construction permit and for the purposes of storage. Alternatively, you could just simply say, motion for second reading as amended, as discussed.
Did the storage piece have 30 days on it?
It did. Was the way that Councilor Evans had read it.
That is correct. So there's 2 different time periods depending on the 2 different uses.
Storage for 30 days. Okay.
So to add to it further, are there any amending motions in our future? Councilor Connick?
Yes.
I would suggest they be forthcoming soon.
Well, that was my question, my prayer, and we have to vote on this first. So we'll vote on it, and then I'll bring my amending motion.
No, that's actually incorrect.
Okay, so that's the clarification I was looking for.
Okay,
Thank you.
so just to be certain, if you choose to make an amending motion to the motion that's now on the floor, you're welcome to do so. It will be voted on first, and then the original motion will be voted on afterwards.
Thank you for the clarification. That's what I was looking for. So, to that end, yes, I would like to make an amending motion that removes 1A entirely. So no temporary structures, seat cans, whatever, blah, 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 on any residential construction.
For any time period.
Any time period.
Very good. Anybody care to speak on the motion amendment? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Do we need to count? Sorry, no.
It's pretty clear.
Oh, very good. So that takes that amendment to the motion off the floor, brings us back to the original motion.
And that's the one that Ross read.
Yes. Correct.
That's mine.
Does anybody care to speak on the motion itself? Looks like everyone's had enough input. All those in favor of second reading of this motion? Opposed? So noted. Thank you, everyone. So we can look forward to an opportunity for third reading at an upcoming meeting. Perhaps the next meeting, but not necessarily.
Yeah,
Director Thompson?
we'll strive for the next meeting.
Very good. And it'll incorporate those changes, and the format will be slightly different than what it was today. Then. Very good.
Use the KISS phone to keep it simple.
I believe that takes us down to item 5.4, Bylaw Enforcement Service Level Report. Director Piche, would you care to take this item?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before council tonight is an update regarding the changes that were made in bylaw enforcement services as a result of the service level review at the end of 2018. Administration wanted to provide council with some statistics that recommend some alterations to the hours of service that may make bylaw enforcement more effective and more accessible. Since the review, the current hours of service for bylaw enforcement are 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Saturday. The 2 officers work 10-hour days, either Monday to Thursday or Wednesdays to Saturdays. Council also directed administration to focus on the education and compliance of the city's bylaws. The new schedule has allowed the staff to be more available to the public in the evenings. However, there are times that the officers could be more effective if they were available for longer hours in the summer. Yet, they have mentioned that there are times where they feel rather ineffective in the winter months when they're patrolling the streets in the dark. In the memo on page 3, there are 2 tables that provide the statistics of numbers for calls after 5 p.m. and on Saturdays. Naturally, the change in the schedule took some time for the public to be aware of the extended hours. Hence, that's why there's such low numbers for January and February. Even still, our officers mention that the public is surprised when they answer a call on a Saturday or in the evenings. Changing the schedule would allow for longer hours in the summer will require the staff to go back to 8-hour days. However, there are more advantages to that change than just expanding the schedule. First, it will ensure that there's more coverage during core hours in the event of an illness or a vacation. It also allows for dual coverage on 4 days a week instead of 2. This is beneficial when there are specific tasks such as street maintenance and parking enforcement projects where other departments utilize their services as well. It also addresses a safety factor to minimize the working alone. In 2019, there were 487 complaints that were either received by the public or generated by bylaw enforcement services. Of those complaints, 144 files were created as reports and 343 were tickets or warnings issued. There is a table on page 4 that breaks down the number of incidents which resulted in either a ticket or a warning or a report being filed. Below that table, there is another one that breaks down the number of incidences on the per day of the week. I do want to highlight that our 2 officers are Community Peace Officer 2s as of June 2019. They have appointments with the province that allows them certain accesses to databases and the ability to write provincial tickets on certain acts of legislation. One of the main reasons that this was important for them to become at least a CPO2 was a safety factor. This afforded the officers to access to participate in the CPO communication and monitoring program through the Lacombe Police Service, where they're able to use AFRACs on the same channels as other organizations and be given secured information regarding residents if they were to attend a property due to a complaint. The officers will still be working on the direction of council to focus on city bylaws. However, they are able to use a few more tools to gain compliance and will be able to follow up in various ways in the event that the education is just not successful. And the last area that is in need of attention are some of the older bylaws. The bylaw enforcement staff must use these bylaws to educate residents and enforce if need be. Over time, language evolves, circumstances change, or the spirited intent is lost as staff change. We have already changed to a new responsible animal ownership bylaw and a new community standards bylaw. It is recommended that we bring other bylaws to council for updating. There are 6 bylaws that have an impact on the bylaw enforcement staff. 2 are already being drafted by other departments. However, 4 will be reviewed and be brought to council over the next 12 to 18 months. These are the bylaw enforcement bylaw, the traffic bylaw, the business license bylaw, and the taxi bylaw. To have a clear and concise bylaw will provide our officers with the proper tools to educate and enforce the governance of council. This evening, administration is looking for approval to change the hours of service for bylaw enforcement and is providing this information or this report as information. If there are any questions, I am happy to take them now.
Thank you, Director Piché. Just for a little clarification, on page 5 of this document there, it says the following are the number of tickets on the day of the week that they were written, and you've got the total number of incidents. Is this calls for service, or is this only tickets, or what is it?
Yeah, thank you for picking that up. I did read that earlier today, and it should be just number of incidents, not number of tickets.
Okay, thank you. Seem to have a lot of other questions. Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I mean, I'm open to making the motions, but I do have a question. Is this not, do we really have to, I guess, doesn't this just fall into management of these positions? Like, does this really have to come before council? Because this isn't a true service delivery change, or but does it cost more? This doesn't cost, right? No. So there's no cost attached to it. So I'm curious why we would have this kind of oversight over just scheduling. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that certainly does differ from some other areas. We certainly don't set hours for public works or that type of thing. So that's certainly a valid question, but there are some good explanations for that question, because I posed that to Chief Gowdy earlier, so perhaps you care to enlighten us as to why this has come before council.
There is an expansion of hours being proposed and a sort of corresponding reduction in hours in the summer, so there is an aspect of just notifying of that. Council had requested a summary report 1 year after the adoption of the original service level change, and so really this was just the opportunity to do that.
So, Director Piche, a little outside the scope of this report, would you mind telling me did you have any feedback from our officers with the proposed changes in hours? Not to suggest that that is going to necessarily change our decision, but I'm just curious how that was received.
No, I did talk to them regarding this before going forward. They actually came to me and talked about the effectiveness of their timings, specifically through the winter. That was one of the things that they really did find difficult, was when they go out to do patrols. When it gets really dark, they do feel ineffective at times. Their patrols aren't emergent. It's not an emergency situation like police. It's really reviewing and looking at properties and seeing sidewalks and just overall conditions of different properties. And it's hard to see that when they're going down back alleys with a little light and checking things out. So that was one of the comments that they did bring forward to me actually back in January. In terms of the flip side, they did like the idea of expanding the hours in the evening in the summer, mainly because and one of my officers actually do say he drives home down Highway 12 and goes past Michener Park, and many times he sees dogs and people off with their animals out in the parks, and without a uniform on, without a truck, they just don't have the ability to go and stop and talk to these people officially. So they did want to see some of that change there. And then of course we are going to be bringing in a bike patrol this coming summer, and this is one of the areas that they do feel that it would be more effective in the evenings in the summer as well.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Hoekstra?
I'm open to making the second motion that council direct administration to change the hours of bylaw enforcement services to reflect the seasons, which extends hours in the summer and shortens the hours in the winter.
Thank you, Councillor Hoekstra. Any additional comments or concerns with this change in service level? Positive change, I might add, but change nonetheless. We're all satisfied? Councillor Hibbs?
Sorry, I just had to double check the wording. I get what you're intending to say, but we're not actually shortening the hours in the winter, are we? Because it's still 8 to whatever, 6 or I forget, sorry. Are the hours actually being shortened?
They are 1 hour less in the evening at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. Sorry.
Finishing at, okay, sorry, now I see finishing at 1800, not finishing at 1900. Okay, yes, so it is technically short. No, I have no concerns. I support the motion.
Very good. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Thank you. Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm understanding that we need that first motion as well to accept the report, because it's essentially, we asked for it back after a year, and so that I would move that council accept that as information. Thank you.
Who says that administration doesn't do exactly as we ask them?
That's what we want.
No additional feedback? All those in favor? None opposed? Thank you. So move on to item 5.6. From an item brought forward by through notice of motion process by Councillor Jacobson, options for redevelopment levy in strategic city areas. Councillor Jacobson. Oh, one moment please before you start. Chief Gowdy, go ahead.
In this particular instance, I think it would be valuable if Director Thompson went through some of the current initiatives that administration has in this area, just so council is aware of some of the current work that's ongoing and how it would tie in with Councillor Jacobson's proposed motion.
Councillor Jacobson, would you prefer, I'm going to give you the option, would you prefer to speak first or hear what administration has to say first?
I actually prefer to speak first.
Then that's the way
lay
to
out.
Go ahead, floor is yours.
Broadly, and then have administration fill in, I guess, wherever it overlap. So this is a motion I've been excited to bring for a while. I tend to be a large procrastinator. I could have done this 2 years ago, but it's just my Wednesdays always seem to fly by. So I'm actually going to put the CAO on the spot for a second, and I'm wondering if he could explain to the best of his ability, for those of us who aren't totally familiar, what the actual economic purpose of offset levies are for new development.
So, I believe bylaw 387 is our offsite levy bylaw, and the purpose of the bylaw is to allow for developers who benefit from offsite infrastructure to contribute financially to that infrastructure, which may not be within their development, and it may have been constructed outside of the time that they actually are specifically developing. And so the best example that I can use is a reservoir. When you come to develop a new neighborhood, the city doesn't need to, we don't construct a new reservoir for every single neighborhood that gets added on. We do it for multiple neighborhoods. And when a new neighborhood comes on, we say, well, you wouldn't be able to develop here unless we had the forethought to construct this reservoir for you. And so you're using half of the capacity, therefore you should pay for half of the reservoir. But of course, as a developer, you may be developing 25 lots with your first phase of development, and so contributing the full cost of half the reservoir isn't realistic. And so instead, the city collects on a per acre or per hectare basis the appropriate cost based on their contributing flow or drop in that example.
So if I could condense it, would it be inaccurate to state that the benefit received by people living in a new neighborhood for city infrastructure is paid for by them?
Yes, correct. That would be new development paying for the infrastructure required for new development.
Sure. And anecdotally, how much extra would we be adding to our tax increases on an annual basis if offset levies were not part of the city revenue program?
That is actually kind of a nuanced question, because you probably wouldn't be engaging in development if that was the case. There just wouldn't be the financial capacity for the city. I guess I would put it this way, that the single largest contributor of infrastructure funding in the city of Lacombe will be offset levy contributions from new development.
Okay, so I wanted to lay that out, and I apologize if I'm being redundant. If all of you read this information, that's fine. But the long story short is that in new development, again, as I try to condense, people who ultimately buy homes, live in this new development, pay for the city infrastructure that was put into place to service that. Okay? So my question for all of you is, philosophically, why is that not applied to redevelopment? In a given area, infill development over time, if there's a bigger house that's going to be torn down, built, new requirements, why is it that that specific home purchaser is not responsible ultimately for paying for the new city infrastructure that's ultimately going to have to go in to service that down the road? I don't think there's a good answer to that. I think they should be, all right? And I can tell you, there are numerous instances that I've been in my own career as a developer, where I've gone to do an infill redevelopment permit, and there was something that should really obviously be done. A real easy one is paving a back lane that's a certain length down a street, right? And it's really easy to do if you're at the end of the street and say, sure, no problem, I can absolutely pave that lane, that makes sense. It's a lot tougher for the developer to say, well, I'm gonna pave the lane if I'm right in the middle of the road, and I gotta pave everybody's lane. Conversely, the city wants it done, it makes a lot of sense, but then it doesn't make a lot of sense for the city, because then they've got to now take on the task of now trying to collect from whoever's gonna develop down the road, all right? So, I've often thought, and again, I'm not sure if this has been done in many other cities. I certainly can't take credit for it as an original idea because it's been bandied about by people I know a lot. That a redevelopment levy or redevelopment levy process of some kind would make a tremendous amount of sense for the overall long-term financial and development stability of the city. So by introducing a process that would work similar to how it works in new construction, not only would there be cost certainty for developers when they come in to know that there is, say, an offsite levy of $5,000 assessed for this lot. If you're going to tear down a house and build a new one, you'll be responsible for paying that. That would then that's full disclosure. That's part of the negotiation of the lot or the house when it's sold. There's no worrying about that. It also gives them certainty through the development process and the application and the MPC process, knowing that there's a very clearly defined levy structure. They're not going to be at the whim of whatever mood MPC is in that night, to be frank with you. All right. So there's all that. Also, it gives the city a very balanced, long-term, manageable way to ultimately replace infrastructure in areas that need to be replaced. It doesn't fall then, and ultimately that burden does not fall on the entire city to pay for development in one area. Ultimately, that is paid for the people who are going to be buying and developing new homes in that area, which is what it should be, right? Because we're upgrading infrastructure for the new homes that need that new infrastructure. I want to be clear, this would not be, in my estimation of this program, something that would be instituted on existing homeowners for existing homes. Even if that home was sold, as long as it was not torn down, there would be no need for that development levy to be collected because the infrastructure there is already serving that. Okay? So the reason I've made this motion very broad is because I wanted to give administration, all kinds of opportunities to explore this and come back with ideas on how this could be implemented. I guess Director Thompson's going to fill me in on how they've already done that, but that was the intent behind my motion, and I look forward to hearing discussion on it.
Thank you, Councillor Jacobson. I guess one question that immediately pops to mind. I think this idea certainly has some possibilities. I'm curious how it is you go about selecting who in fact does pay this. How do you know if there's going to be one in the neighborhood or 101, or how do you go about apportioning those future costs?
Again, so my vision of that, so say neighborhood A has been, there's a levy amount determined to replace roads and sewer systems or whatever, and back alleys for this section of town. And it very much is going to be a long-term thing. So basically, as those houses are purchased, torn down, and applied for redevelopment, then that pays in, right? So there's no, everybody in the neighborhood is going to pay, but it's only payable when a redevelopment permit is pulled. That makes sense. So the city could be collecting for 15, 20 years before it's going to make that happen, or it could genuinely decide to fund that, knowing it's going to be collecting for another 50 years after that, right? But at least there's a mechanism in place to ultimately do that, and also, more importantly, I think, for city administration to manage when and how that's going to be implemented, in a fair process for everybody who's going to be doing redevelopment work in that neighborhood.
Thank you. Director Thompson, I'll give you an opportunity to update us as to current progress on this subject. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Creasy, and likewise, I was kind of excited to see the notice of motion come through because we are doing some work in this area, and so I'm happy to provide an overview of what that entails. And so part of Council's capital budget this year includes a large project that we're calling the Infrastructure Growth and Infill Master Plan. And the big component of that project is looking at infill infrastructure and the impact of infill development on the city of Lacomb's infrastructure, both from an engineering capacity point of view on streets and roads, pipes, sewer, storm, but also look at the specific issue of lane paving, looking at streetscape development, things like the bearing council early in the term considering the option of installing new streetlights in the old area of Lacombe, and the costs were prohibitive at that time. But certainly if there was a levy in place that was kind of funding or going towards something like that, then perhaps over time that could be more palatable in the future. And so that's a project we're looking at. We're looking at, in that we're going to look at different population growth scenarios and how, where certain areas are more likely to develop and what that means to infrastructure, because certainly it's very different to say we have a 2.2% growth rate across the city, but if that is concentrated in one specific area, that could have a different impact on what needs to be upgraded versus if that's spread across the whole neighborhood. That may not have as big of an impact from a development point of view. We want to look at what's going to trigger the need for upgrades. Lane paving, again, specifically looking at some clear triggers on when we would need lane paving to occur. As well as some levy scenarios and whether there is one levy that goes across a broad area or if there's kind of zones that have perhaps different levies. So for council's information, our land use or our offset levy bylaw has different zones across the city. So it's not one levy for the whole city. There's different levies for different benefiting areas. And so we are going to look at that as well. So that work has kicked off early this year, and we are targeting bringing something forward to council late 2020.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jacobson. I'll give you an opportunity to respond or address to that update if you would like.
No, I mean, that sounds like you're reading my mind, honestly.
Chief Gowdy?
So one thing I wanted to differentiate just between replacement and upgrading, and so typically, like you had used the example you said a couple times of like before, or when someone tears down the house. If someone was tearing down the house and replacing with another single-family home, that would not typically trigger infill levy because there's no intensification of the demand on municipal infrastructure. So typically we would see this applied at the time of a rezoning for an infill development. That you would say, well, you're going from the simplest is R1 to R4. Well, the allowable units on an R4, your lot could support eight units, and then previously it was 1. And so what we've envisioned is probably something that's tied to, as close as we can, to an intensification of the demand on those municipal services, just as a comment.
Councilor Jacobson?
Yeah, and as a comment to that, and I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with that, the only thing that I would like to look at as an addition to that is in neighborhoods that have become so old and derelict that they're going to have to be replaced regardless, whatever points of infrastructure that may be. And again, not that the levy would cover, even the entire amount, but even a percentage of that, because obviously the people who live right on that street or that neighborhood are going to be to the benefit most of that, right? So that would be, and again, I'm not even saying that after I see all of it laid out that I wouldn't even follow through with that, but that would be the only addition to that.
I think that earlier you made a comment that who is it that pays these costs, and I guess one could argue that those people that have paid taxes on an ongoing basis on a particular area, they have in fact contributed somewhat to our reserves over a given period of time, likely in the neighborhood of somewhere between 50 and 75 years in a lot of these areas. So that certainly would account for a portion of it, but I think that we need to remember that as well. Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I look forward to seeing what the administration brings forward. I kind of wonder in my back mind if this makes it infill development, redevelopment a little more onerous. Perfect example is Mr. Wilson here this evening. If we tell him now that if he wants to subdivide 2 lots into 6 and he has to pay an additional $5,000 per lot, will he undertake to do that type of thing now? Because that's significant, right? So it's interesting. I wonder if it makes a little more, and I understand the reasons why Councilor Jacobs brought this forward, and it makes sense, but I wonder, part of me wonders if then developers will then say, well, forget it, I'm not going to do this infill because it's going to cost me this much more. I'll just do a new build instead in a new subdivision. Anyways, I look forward to seeing
you. Councillor Jacobson?
Sure, I just want to respond to that. So yeah, that's a great example, because Michael Wilson with Multi Construction, he had to pave a back lane to make that all work. So again, my thought for this is not that this is going to be in addition to costs that administration already imposed on developers, somewhat arbitrarily, I mean, never with bad intention, but somewhat arbitrarily and somewhat in a negotiating fashion with the attitude of the neighborhood, but that this is just a very defined process of, this is what you're going to pay because this is going to cover off eventually the paving, the this, the that, the other. It's just out there. It's in a scheduled list of costs. And if anything, again, I think it would add to the certainty for redevelopment, not only for the developer, but then also for the neighborhood, which would then in turn produce a lot less contentious MPC meetings.
And not have to put up with those moody individuals on NPC as you referred further. Councillor Gullickson.
I hope you weren't talking about me.
Definitely not.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I agree with Councillor Jacobson's last statement, and I believe that in that development you were talking about, that infrastructure, he paid for all that, so that's already included in his lot pricing. Whereas what we're talking about is where the city would do it, and it would be included in lot pricing spread out over a larger area. So it's almost an example of this scenario. The one concern I would have is setting the price on it. How would we protect that pricing against inflation? Like 50 years from now, quite a difference if I'm paying $5,000 compared to today.
Chief Gotti, did you want to field that question?
So we typically update these on a 5 or 7 year rotation, that we would look at the levy structure and update it. There is the chance for sure that if a municipality collects $5,000 a lot from someone and then 7 years later goes to pave the lane, you would lose some buying power. The challenge right now that we run into when we're dealing particularly with smaller developers is that it is a negotiation. They come in and say, well, you're not very far from the end of the lane. You're only 2 houses in, so we'll ask you to pave the whole thing. And they'll say, well, paving the whole thing, that's like $20,000 to my project. And it becomes very much a back and forth where the developer has already expended significant funds buying the lot, doing up plans for the home, sometimes having demolished a home on the lot. And then we're attempting to negotiate sometimes very significant costs with them, that I think the certainty that Councillor Jacobson talked about would be appreciated by many smaller developers.
Both the certainty and the knowledge of it up front prior to investing significant effort into a project. Okay.
So withdraw the next motion or stays?
Anyone else? Been debating here for a minute, so I had to be reminded that in fact the motion is on the floor before us. I would ask that the legislative coordinator reread the motion, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. The motion from Councillor Jacobson is that Council direct administration to research and present options for instituting a redevelopment levy in strategic areas of the city.
And given that there's no time frame involved in that item, I would expect that Councillor Jacobson was pleased with the presentation by Director Thompson and satisfied with the time frame indicated there. Councillor Ross?
So, thank you, Mayor Creasy. So all due respect, are you moving forward with the motions? The motion's on the floor, or can we just rescind it because it's already being dealt with by administration?
I think this needs to go for a vote. The only one that could remove it from the floor would be the mover, and I rather doubt that there's any expectation of that.
It's gonna go.
Just vote it.
We're gonna vote.
That's a fair process question, but
No,
it needs to go to a vote.
That's all I'm asking, so it's...
Yeah. Very good. So I see no additional input. Good vote. Very good. Then on the motion motion that was just reread. All those in favor? Those opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So down to the bottom of the request for decision tab there, Director Piche. We've got bylaw 365.1, the records retention bylaw, up for a second and possibly third reading. If you care to walk us through that item, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yes, before council tonight is bylaw 365.1, an amendment to bylaw 365, the records retention, disposal, and release of municipal documents bylaw. This bylaw has not been updated since it was adopted in 2010. However, administration is proposing some changes that will better reflect the way the city's records are kept to be in alignment with legislation standards and be robust enough to address the changes in technology and to allow for more streamlined process when updating the retention schedule as needed. Some of the proposed changes to the bylaw is an update to the definition list, providing authority to the CAO to establish and maintain the retention schedule, as well as even provide direction on destruction or extension of retaining records. The other thing is the change in fee service, the fee schedule for an information request to be in accordance with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy fee regulations. Administration is requesting second and third reading of bylaw 365.1 this evening, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to address them now.
Thank you, Director Piche. Councillor Gullickson, did you have some comments?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. No, I'm just going to make the motion that council gives second reading to bylaw 365.1.
Appreciate that. Now that your light's working. Any additional input? No questions or concerns? Very good. All those in favor? That was easy, Director Piche. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you again. I move that council give third reading to bylaw 365.1.
Very good. Similar amount of input I'm expecting. I will call the question. All those in favor? That was unanimous as well. Yes. All right, thank you. We'll jump over section 6 and go to adoption of minutes next. We've got the February 10th meeting, regular meeting minutes on the agenda package before you. Everybody's had an opportunity to review those. If there's any concerns, please bring them forward. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I have no issue with them, so we pass those on their own then and accept as presented.
Thank you. Anyone else? With respect to the motion before us and the adoption of the previous minutes from February 10th, all those in favor? Thank you. Now we will go back up to the information section, section number 6. The first item up is administrative reports. We've got update from the CAO.
We do. Nothing really urgent there. I would say one thing of interest is that we are beginning work on subdivision rezoning and land preparation of the Highway 12 commercial property. And we met with our regional partners in Lacombe County to begin the process for connection of the ME Global plant to the North Red Deer Regional Wastewater Services Commission system.
Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Just a comment here. You have staff touring Public Works Building in preparation of concept plan for the City of Lacomb's building. I'm hoping that you actually consult with the Public Works staff as well, is what they'd like to see. I'm assuming that's happening, but I just want to put that out there that
Just to be very clear, it's not me going on these tours, it is Public Works staff, the manager of the building, and some of our supervisors, along with the director of.
no, and I get that, but I'm just saying, are we, we're gonna talk to everyone over there and say, hey, guys, what would you like to see? I think that's vitally important. They know best.
Consulting with the users of the building, for sure.
So, as an update item with your report, did you care to mention at all an update on the proposed auction that was advertised?
So we did have an advertised auction, however, the taxes have been brought up to date, and so the auction will not proceed, and that has been advertised that that has been canceled. So, good news, I guess, on that front.
Very good, and just to be certain then that was all handled according to MGA requirements?
Yes, it was.
I would expect so, but thank you for clarifying that. We have no council mailbox items, but we do have some commission board and committee reports and minutes from the Ricabitsu Annual General Meeting minutes of January 28th. Councillor Hoekstra, would you care to comment on that item?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Typically, these haven't come forward, but there's very clear request from this committee to know what the future direction is for their efforts. So I included the minutes, and out of this will come a notice of motion to that end.
Thank you for that. And 6.3B, Lacombe Commission minutes from January 7th. Councillor Connick, that's one of your seats. Would you care to add anything?
Nothing to add.
Very good. So we'll move on to councillor reports. Only because I don't have mine in front of me ready. Councillor Gullickson, would you care to do your report, please?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I don't have a report this meeting. I'll have one for the next meeting.
Very good. Anything verbal you'd care to add or no?
No, I had very little.
Very good. Councillor Ross. Councillor Hoekstra.
My report is in front of you, and I have nothing to add at this point. Well, maybe I should just, the bottom thing about the trouts, the trout pond, that the stocking of the trout pond also comes with the responsibility of dealing with predators. So I was curious how we might have to deal with that in the future.
That certainly is an issue, and hopefully that's something that is being addressed currently from several different directions, none of which I hope will involve council. Councillor Jacobson?
I don't have a report.
Councillor Hibbs?
My report is included. I don't really have anything outstanding to talk about as far as those items go, although I have an additional comment that's sort of related. So it's in dealing with minutes. Of course, there's the ICF committee that meets, and I was thinking about this, that I think that we're perhaps being remiss in not sharing the minutes. Now, of course, those would have to be shared, or notes, I guess, technically. Those would have to be shared in camera, but I think that that would probably be appropriate. And so maybe that could be the practice going forward. I would be interested to see what people would think of that. The other thing, and I know I've brought this up in the past, but I really do think in the idea of transparency and accountability, that the minutes from MPC should be included with. They are a separate entity, but so is the police commission, and they have their own website and they publish their own minutes, and yet we include the minutes in the mailbox for that entity, but we don't for MPC. So I really would like to see us, I'm asking for us to include MPC minutes going forward in the mailbox like every other committee, etc., like the expectation should be of every other committee, commission, etc., etc. So again, not exactly related to my report, but I would put those two thoughts out there and yeah, definitely tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that would increase accountability to the public as far as the public mailbox goes, and I think that would help the in-camera side of things. I think that would help council also stay on top of sort of things as they progress in a well, I guess a more transparent way to you. So yeah, I just put that out there.
Thank you for that. I guess just to address the item with the ICFs that needs to say a little late in the process to start that now. I think that was perhaps my understanding when we selected the committee of which you're a part of to undertake the agreement with the county. There was an expectation to bring the initial agreement back to council, which we have done. On future negotiations like that, I have no reason to suggest that we cannot bring them forward in an in-camera fashion, which those were held in confidence for sure. But certainly, when we'll take tonight, I really hope that anybody would mind seeing the Municipal Planning Commission notices. I think I have a hard time calling them. I guess we could include the entire minutes. Was it the entire minutes, or was it just the listing of the approvals and whatnot that you wanted to see in that?
I would say that just the minutes, so not the entire agenda packages. Unlike like the Waste Commission, we get the whole thing, and I'm thinking that that's perhaps overkill. But just the minutes, like we do with the Police Commission, like we do with the Water Commission, et cetera, right? Just the minutes.
Very good. Councillor Connick.
No report next time.
Very good. So I did locate mine here. It's before you. Just a few items from January 21st. The photo op with Vest Energy, I think it's important that we do recognize the valuable contribution that a lot of organizations make towards our community. This one, some $30,000 given towards various community initiatives, and we certainly thank Vesta for their investment in our community. I think I alluded to the AUMA Summit, President's Summit on Municipal Finance. We did discuss a tremendous number of different things. The one thing I do want to impress upon you is that the city of Lacombe has undertaken every suggestion, I believe, that was brought up at that meeting, which I was hoping for some earth-shattering breakthroughs and some ideas that would assist the city in finances, but I'm hard-pressed to think of one item that was brought up that the city is not already undertaking, other than some of the dealings with the federal government that were not necessarily applicable to us. Can you Chief Gowdy?
They had an interesting talk about budgeting where you would sort of set the true cost accounting of different services and then make an evaluation of how much subsidization you would apply to that specific service, which I liked. I think it is a monumental undertaking for a municipality of our size, but something we've talked about a bit internally. But other than that, no, I can't think of anything that jumped out at me.
All right, thank you. A somewhat city-related function. However, I'll just mention the Lacombe Generals game on February 1st. I did actually take in one of those final games with Lacombe and Daysland only because I happened to win the 50-50. So I just wanted to let everybody know that more than anything. And no, it was not rigged, and I did buy my own tickets, and no, the city did not pay for my ticket to go to the hockey game. The hosted meet and greet from our MP Calkins. Was there to have a short chat with the Honorable Peter McKay. His attendance was hosted by, as I said, by our Member of Parliament, Glenn Calkins. And it was interesting to hear Mr. McKay speak on a few different issues. It was held in Red Deer. The Stars the Dance Among the Stars fundraiser was certainly an enjoyable event to attend, and kudos to Reed Law on her very well received dance routine called Entitled Monkey Business, which was very appropriate given her day job as a politician. It was a fun evening and enjoyed by everyone there that I spoke with, for sure. The media event, to field questions arising from our being council's meeting decisions regarding city properties. Certainly had a fair bit of correspondence since, and from my perspective I would suggest that nearly every single bit of it has been very positive. And once I offered some clarification, the one that was not so positive to start with, I think might have changed their opinion as well. The Alberta Seniors Provincial Curling Championships on the 11th. Was just to acknowledge once again the time spent by Councillor Gullickson in assisting with that event, and to acknowledge the honorary first rock delivered by Cliff Carson, a longtime community advocate, and that was good to see he and his team there as well to welcome the players from across the province. I expect that Councillor Gullickson will have a complete listing of all the winners for us available in his report for next time. The check presentation photo opportunity on the 12th of February, Councillor Hoekstra and myself, along with Lacombe Fish and Game President Greg Lunn and the world's largest liver proponent Brad Pallister, were there to welcome Ken Cranrod and present a check for $15,000 on the trout stocking for that pond. And February 13th, met with a reporter from Global Edmonton. You may have seen it on the news sometime later, a few days. Certainly on an important issue, not a direct municipal issue, in that it was about the Lacombe Hospital, but certainly some of the impacts of it of changes being made that affect our community, for sure. And then attended also the Fair Deal panel, which was hosted by our MLA and the LMC, and had a fair bit of feedback from citizens that were disappointed in the way that this particular event was advertised. They felt that there was not sufficient notice given for it, which was unfortunate, because I think that they were certainly prepared for more attendees, but I was, quite frankly, was expecting more attendance. I know that a few of us were there, but still interesting to hear what individuals had to say. I would suggest most of which were not necessarily residents of the city of Lacombe. That was all the items of interest that I had over that time period. Does anyone have any questions for any of those that supplied reports? Perhaps we could move these for acceptance. Councillor Hibbs.
I will so move.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Very good. So we have no notices of motion this evening, and we have some in-camera items after that. At the moment, it is 7:30. I suggest that we reconvene at 7:45, take a short break to chat with the press. Feel good to recess until 7:45 then? Very good. Thank you.